Are you lonely?
Oh, yeah.
And he came to a certain place and stayed there that night, because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place to sleep. And he dreamed, and behold, there was a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and to your offspring. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. And in you and your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it.
And he was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. Then Jacob rose early in the morning and took the stone that he had put at his head, set it up as a pillar, and poured oil on top of it. And he called the name of that place Bethel, but the name of that city had been was previously. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me and keep me in this way that I am going, and give me bread to eat, clothing to put on, so that I come back to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God. And this stone which I have set as a pillar shall be God's house. And all that you give me, I will surely give a tenth to you.
Thank you. Ben, can you get 1 Kings 12:28? Amanda, can you get 2 Kings 23:15? And Ben, yours is actually 28 through 29. And,
sorry, what chapter? I'm sorry.
1 Kings 12:28 and actually it's through 32. And then Amanda, it's 2 Kings 23:15 through 19. Those will be on deck. We'll have those ready to go. And then Robert, if you could get 1 Timothy 6 through 8. 1 Timothy 6 through 8. We talked about the representation of the ladder and what the ladder meant. We talked about that the ladder was Christ by his testimony in John 1:51, where the angels are ascending and descending on the Son of Man. And this picture, this dream that we've seen that Jacob has had is, as you just stand back and look at it, you see heaven, you see earth, and you see some sort of interaction between heaven and earth. You don't see the two separate. You see some sort of interaction there. And these angels are making access into heaven itself, but they are ascending and descending on something, and that ladder obviously is Christ, as we've discussed. So Christ is the mediator between God and man. He is the one through whom we have access to heaven. He is the only means of getting into heaven, and so Christ is that ladder, that true representation of the means to be able to get into heaven itself by means of the mediator, by means of Christ. And so the dream is one that has it's a very weighty, has weighty implications. It's what we see is that Jacob is dreaming, and this dream has been given to him. It's been given to him by God. God is the one who's standing at the top of that ladder and inviting basically in Jacob and showing him, like he has to Abraham and to Isaac, showing him his plan and then giving him the explanation of what that covenant is. In the promise, he ends up reiterating all of the previously discussed, the things that he's going to give to Abraham and to Isaac, and now he's repeating that in this dream to Jacob. So he's going to give, this is the promise of the land, this is the promise of the offspring, and that God will be with him. So until it even says in down later, it says, until I fulfill my promises. I mean, Jacob's going to be long gone by the time that God fulfills his promises. We've talked about how Abraham himself looked at that promise, and what did he see? He looked into that far-reaching fulfillment. He didn't have descendants as numerous as the sky and as countless as the sand on the seashore. He had two. Basically when Abraham died, he had Jacob and Esau as that representation of what's going to happen, indicating to us the eschatological nature of Abraham's faith, pointing into eternity itself, into the fulfillment past his own life, and also, as we've seen, indicating that Abraham believed in the resurrection. So this is that pointing forward to Christ and to the ladder through whom all of the nations of the earth will be blessed. So the content of Jacob's faith, Jacob has the reaction to what's going on, and notices that this is a very serious dream. It has a lot of weight. It's the dream itself is something that is causes him to be fearful and responding in fear, something that we've seen before, something that we've talked about, that as man sees God in some sort of manifestation, representation, then he does well to fall on his face before God, or to understand that how God interacts with man. And that is certainly the implications of what Jacob has here, that his interaction, his reaction to that dream is one of fear and awe and reverence. We're not going to see this, Jacob is not going to see this fulfillment. He's going to see some of it. He's going to have the 12 sons, but it's going to take a long time. And he's out. We got to realize the context of this dream. He's out as he's wandering up. He's going up to Padan Aram, and going to go to his family up there, and where his mother came from, and get himself a wife. So that's what his dad has instructed him in, sending him out alone, not with any help, any assistance, he didn't have the camels, he didn't have the wealth, he didn't have all of the stuff that the servant had when Abraham sent him out to go get a wife for Isaac. He didn't have any of that stuff. He didn't have the gold. He didn't have any of the amenities that were sent out with him. He's alone. So we ask the question, what's going on here? And if we back up just a little bit, we see the character of Jacob. We've looked at that character. What we have seen is that character is not a very good character. So God is in the business of training his servant, and he's going to train him in righteousness, and he's going to put him through a series of situations and circumstances that help him to develop his faith. This is the first one. So he's alone. He's in the wilderness. We talked about the threat to him of having beasts and wild animals out there with him. He's got to forage. He's got to do the survivalist thing. We're not doing reality TV. He's having to actually survive on his own. And so this is teaching him dependence on God as he's going about this, going up. This is going to take a while for him to get that 500 miles to get to Padan Aram. So he's having to trust in the Lord, that the Lord would protect him against wild animals and against invading, hordes or peoples that through whose land he would be going. And so he's having to learn to depend on the Lord, and that is how God is instructing his servant in the here and now in this particular segment of Genesis. So Calvin says that, well, given the context that if God doesn't seem to be blessing us, then let us look to Jacob. It says, if God seems to approach us empty-handed, it is still proper that we should pay such honor and reverence to his word that we may be enriched and filled with faith. So we think about, well, in our immediate society, God did not answer my prayer. So, what's happening, God? What are you doing? We go an hour a day, a week, and God hasn't answered our prayers. And yet this is going to be a long time in coming for the fulfillment of the promise that God gives to Jacob. So this is instructional for us to realize that long-term view, as the Faith Hall of Fame gives us that instruction, that this is over a long period of time, that faith is developed and exercised, and that there's a very real, in the here and now, having to look to God for and believe in those promises that God gave to him. Okay, so see the angels ascending and descending on the ladder. Your offspring will be like the dust of the earth. That's something that he would have heard from his father and from his grandfather. And the connection then for Jacob of the promises of God being given to his parents and to the grandparents. And so now he sees that this is actually not just the blessing of his father, but it's also something that God is making manifest to him. He says, surely the Lord is in this place, and I didn't know it in verse 16. And he's afraid. He reacts in fear and awe, like I'm sure all of us would do. So I'm not gonna make any editorial comments on that. In terms of trusting God making himself manifest to his servant. And he exclaims that this is none other than Beth-El, the house of God. That's what Bethel means. And this is the gate of heaven. There's, if he were here, he would make sure that I mentioned the kind of the context of this, that in that culture, or in those cultures that are around that area, that they would have had special places. And the higher you go, then it seems like you're higher to God and that you have easier accesses to God. The high places themselves, Israel is going to stumble over, because that's what the thought process is. Babel itself was, that at that elevated plateau from which we could actually get better access to God, and we can, appease God or the gods for what we want. But Bethel itself is not. I forgot geographically where Bethel is. I don't know whether it's on the ridgeline. I think it may be, but I'm not sure about that. But at any rate, so Bethel kind of reestablishes itself in redemptive history, and it doesn't end up having a good record. We're going to go into what ends up happening at Bethel in 1 Kings 12, verses 28 through, you can read 28 through 33. Then here's what's happening at Bethel is that you have Jeroboam. taking golden calves, making golden calves, and making those into an idol at Bethel. We've already talked about the connection with Abraham, that Bethel is, but in the consciousness of the individual, in the consciousness of Jacob and especially the peoples around him, there would be a special blessing on the place itself. Okay, so this is the meeting place that, in his mind, we have access to God all the time through Christ, but we're talking about the specialness of a place as well. So in Bethel, we've already had one instance in redemptive history with Abraham, but now we have this other. And as we trace that through, what we end up seeing is that bad things end up happening at this particular location. So 1 Kings 12:28-33.
After seeking advice, the king made 2 golden calves. He said to the people, "It is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. One he set up in Bethel, and the other in Dan. And this thing became a sin. The people went even as far as Dan to worship the one there. Jeroboam built shrines on high places and appointed priests from all sorts of people, even though they were not Levites. He instituted a festival on the 15th day of the 8th month, like the festival held in Judah, and offered sacrifices on the altar. This he did in Bethel, sacrificing to the calves he had made. And at Bethel he also installed priests at the high places he had made. On the 15th day of the 8th month, a month of his own choosing, he offered sacrifices on the altar he had built at Bethel. So he instituted the festival for the Israelites and went up to the altar to make offerings."
Okay. Jeroboam would have had the law and that revelation. He would have had the 10 Commandments not to make idols. And as Noah has explained, those idols were not idols that were of other gods. No, these are the golden calf that Aaron said sprang up, out of the ground. That calf was an idol of Yahweh. That's what. So this can become a stumbling block, as we see here. 2 Kings 23:15-19.
Even the altar at Bethel, the high place, made by Jeroboam the son of Nebat, who had caused Israel to sin, even that altar and high place he demolished. He burned the high place and ground it to powder, and burned the Asherah pole also. Then Josiah looked around, and when he saw the tombs that were there on the hillside, he had the bones removed from them, and burned on the altar to defile it, in accordance with the word of the Lord, who proclaimed by the man of God, who foretold these things. The king asked, "What is that tombstone I see?" The man of the city said, "It marks the tomb of the man of God who came from Judah and pronounced against the altar of Bethel the very things you have done to it." "Leave it alone," he said. "Don't let anyone disturb his bones." So they spared his bones and those of the prophet who had come from Samaria. Just as he had done at Bethel, Josiah removed and defiled all the shrines at the high places that the kings of Israel have built in the towns of Samaria that have provoked the Lord to anger.
Okay, Josiah being a good king, one of the few, one of the 8 for Judah. And he ended up tearing down the high places. But where did this happen? It happened at Bethel. So what's going on here? We have back to Jacob. Jacob takes a stone. Jacob uses that stone as a pillow. And then he finds out after the dream that this is the place of God. This is actually Bethel. And this is that house of God. So he takes the stone and he anoints the stone. Oil being in redemptive history, the application of the Holy Spirit. For Jacob himself, this would be something that he is trying to set apart, this place, this location. We give Jacob the benefit of the doubt because at this point we don't have the revelation that you're not to make altars, you're not to make idols. This is what's going to end up happening. But what Jacob is doing is establishing a memorial, if you will. It isn't that Jacob wants to establish an altar and sit down and worship at that altar or make sacrifices at that altar. What Jacob wants to do is establish that memorial. So he can say to his kids, hey, at Bethel, by the way, you can go up there and look and see that was that same stone that I slept on and where God revealed himself. And so then you have a location that people can go to. And yet, as we know through the history of redemption, that objects and the locations and bones of the saints, can end up being venerated. In the Catholic hierarchy, you get certain numbers of days off of your time in purgatory if you see the bones of this saint or that saint and so forth. So into even the New Testament era, we still have that tendency, as Calvin said, the human heart is an idol factory. So we continue to make idols. And the risk of that is that we no longer worship the true God. We worship the place. We limit God in our representations, and they don't show the full glory. How can the glory of God be revealed in a stone, in an altar, in a place? It ends up limiting the worship of God. We no longer have that. There's no top on that understanding of God. Nobody could ever say that they understood who God is, because there's no fathoming infinity. So that's one of the risks. And yet we're not going to say to Jacob that you're doing wrong right now. What he is doing is manifesting his wanting to establish that memorial. So we'll leave it at that. Okay, and so he didn't. He's fearful. He establishes the altar, and he pours oil on that place. He names the place, and that location is the same place as the city of Luz. So, but he names it Bethel. The statement that Jacob makes is it sounds like a conditional statement. We say, if God will be with me and will keep me in this way. The Hebrew, just like the Greek, that conditional actually can be translated since. Or as the literal translates it, seeing that God will be with me, then there's not that if then, as like there is in the English. The reason that I'm making that point, the translators all translated if God. What I'm trying to get at is this point of it isn't like God, like Jacob's making a deal with God. We know that that deal making has gone on before, but it's not like, at least in this present situation, like he's trying to make if you will be with me and you will give me the stuff that I need, then you'll be my God, and I'll worship you. So that isn't the sense of the way, at least according to the commentators, that they interpret this. Now notice what he's asking for here. Since God is going to be with me and keep me in the way that I will go, and bring me bread to eat and clothing to wear. He's in the middle of the wilderness. He's cold. He needs food and he needs clothing. That's what his need is. And even the reference in the New Testament, Paul talking to Timothy, we define so much as a need, and yet we get that sense of what is real need. Robert, can you read 1 Timothy 6, verses 6 through 8?
But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into this world, and we certainly can carry nothing out. And having food and raiment, let us be therewith content.
Okay. Food and clothing, that's what we need. That's what God defines as need. We define need as a house. Okay, I'm with you on the shelter thing. I need a house, but I need a car. I need my interphone. I mean my iPhone. I need my internet. I need. And how much of that distracts us from true contentment, true godliness? Has God been faithful, each one of us, in giving us food and raiment? We can all say yay and amen, and yet right in the next thought we go, yeah, but that's assumed. That's what, I have been given that and I'm supposed to be given that. That's a blessing from God. The fact that we do have food and clothing. You know that the whole 1/6 of the world's population lives below way below the poverty line, not what we define in the United States as poverty, but like on $200 a year kind of poverty. Like they don't know where the next meal is going to come from. And we're talking malnutrition, and we're talking kids that die because they don't have the next meal. So they're practicing fasting, but yeah, because they have to. So that's need. That's being called. That's destitute. But God provides for us day in and day out. Not one of us in this room can ever say that we have not. God has not provided for us food and clothing. Yeah.
I wonder if any of the commentators picked up thematic parallel to Jesus's line. Do not worry about what you eat or drink, but seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. Is there some sense in which Jacob is almost a forerunner of that, saying, if God will provide my food and my shelter and my clothing, then I will seek first the kingdom and his righteousness.
Yeah, neither Calvin nor Morris, expanded that, but that's very good. That's a great connection. If God has taken care of our basic necessities, then we can focus on what's important, right? We can focus on, since we have food, since we have clothing, and we don't have to worry about that. We worry about, inconsequential things. And even in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, well, if you worry, what does it gain you? Can you add one minute to your lifetime? So we go, God has given me this and so much more. So all of we ask God for those basic things, and God provides, he heaps blessing upon blessing. And that's how we have to look at it. The glass is not half empty. We're not, in human nature, we look at the half empty part of it. But it's like full and it's overflowing, and we just don't recognize that. We go having to complain about the spill up or something. It's that was a feeble attempt at a joke, obviously it didn't work. But God has this effervescence of blessing that he's pouring out on us. And it is good for us to be content with the basic necessities. It is good for us to recognize that outpouring of blessing that comes upon us just because of, God's favor towards us. God's favor towards Jacob and towards his keeping of the covenant promises. So it's helpful to rewire our expectations and to see those all as blessings. Okay, any comments so far? Any other things? Ben, go ahead.
Talking about making a memorial, it starts to make me think about or wonder churches that use a cross, like at the front. Is that what they're getting at with that being a memorial, as opposed to something that's an item to worship?
Yeah. You've seen on the front of the altar, no, on the front of the table, in remembrance of me, and Noah does a fantastic job every time of reminding us of part of the remembrance that do this in remembrance of me, but that is an empty cross, right? In contrast to the crucifix that still has Jesus on the altar, or the re-crucifying that, as the the Catholic priest faces Jesus. The Protestant faces the congregation. You know, there's a big difference, but that's a good point.
Yeah.
We're trying to get away from objects of worship, you know, and a cross can become a limitation. You know, if I worship the cross, if I kiss the cross, some of the veneration that the Catholics do, they kiss the cross, right? When they do the rosary or
Probably.
yeah.
I think you have a good illustration there at your elbow that if we ever start celebrating the lid of the communion cups because of its cross,
Yeah.
we should probably unfret it, throw it away, and put a pull knot for Lowe's on it. You know, if we ever start celebrating that more than the cup itself.
Yeah.
But even in turn, if we begin to celebrate the cup or the bread instead of the Christ that it represents, then we've got another problem. We can't get rid of the bread and the cup, that's a command. But we'll have to get rid of our hearts, which worship the cross on the lid, that worship the cup in the tray instead of the Christ, who is represented in these things. And you know, in that light, we should even go a step farther and recognize that the bread and the cup are commanded by Christ as memorials, whereas the cross is not. That doesn't make it bad. It doesn't mean you don't have to go take that off. But we shouldn't put it on par with the bread and the wine, which has the command of Christ as being his only memorial.
Yeah.
That's the only stone he anointed, so to speak, to be remembered by.
Yes, very good. And isn't it interesting as we think about this, that as you said, this is a very physical sign that is commanded. And so we go, there's something about this physical representation that is necessary, so that, you know, it isn't so spiritualized. So I think Jeremiah had a point, and then I'll be back to you later.
Yeah, I mean, you're just kind of touched on it, but I think sometimes there can be a tendency to condemn the material things, the physical things, when in reality, like that can be part of the truth. Is that, you know, God created both the spiritual and the physical, the material, and you know, it was good originally the way it was intended. And God gave us physical signs and things that would help us to understand the truths, like the other things that God instituted. So it's always important to remember the physical things are not bad in themselves. It's we that bring the sin into the object.
Yeah. And the difficulty for the Christian of the mental work that has to go on, that says, I don't stop there. I worship the God that, or, you know, I worship Jesus who isn't on the cross. But
The one thing that Christ did say about the cross is that if we're to follow him, we're to carry our own cross. So
There we
if
go.
we look at that and see it as a symbol of how we're willing to follow Christ and be willing to suffer for him, then it's probably could be helpful. But not if you're thinking, oh, look at this thing that's so wonderful that I can carry. No, the point of the cross is that it's a sign of suffering. It's a sign of the lowness of, you know, humility, not a sign of exaltation.
yeah, very good.
Tool of death and destruction.
Right,
So,
right.
you know,
For the Roman world, certainly. And they would have understood that. Okay, so last point, the tithe. We've seen the tithe. Abraham gave a tenth of all his stuff to Melchizedek. And so then instituting that, you know, he's giving back to a representative of God. Here we have the patriarch Jacob saying that he's going to give back a tenth of everything that God gives to him. And there again, we have that he desires to give that back to God. He desires this as Calvin says, three purposes in that. Number one, it's a giving for spiritual worship. To, you know, he's trimming off the edges of his excess stuff. He's giving back to God, acknowledging where this came from in the first place. All of his blessings come from God. It's also a statement that when he gives back to, it's a visible representation to others of, the giving of, I'm willing to give, that sacrificial, characteristic. And then also that as he gives to others, he's giving to the needs of the people. So he's including that understanding that God has made the poor of the earth, and now he's helping those people out. So very helpful to think about the tithe in that kind of way. I think that when we do ours, the alms offering, that is visible to us as well. Any comments on the tithe? Any? Some contemplation on that one. Let's see.
Doesn't, it's kind of interesting to contrast it with, Jacob was just talking about being provided his bare necessities, food, clothing, and then he goes on to talk about tithe, which, almost implies a degree of excess, a degree of more than just food. If you're able to tithe, obviously you got more. So perhaps it's illustrative of that point you're talking about. This isn't Jacob saying that God gives me these things, but he's confident that God is going to bless him with his necessities and obviously bless.
Yeah.
I think that remains true for us, doesn't it? To give away 10% or whatever it is every Lord's Day is certainly a profound statement that I'm not going to start this week.
No.
I don't need to hold on to this portion. I'm confident another portion will come.
Yeah, and when Paul talks about it, it's, you get handed the paycheck, and the first thing that comes out, the first fruits, that come out are going to be that tithe. So establishing that kind of cutting down what I have made right off the bat and giving it back to God as an acknowledgement of what he's done as a sign to myself and to others.
Well, in Malachi 3:10, well, I just studied this in community Bible study, if I can find it. That says,
Bring the full tithe into the storehouse,
Right.
that there may be food in my house, and thereby put me to the test, says the Lord of hosts, if I will not open the windows of heaven for you and pour down for you a blessing until there is no more need. There we go. Yeah. Very good.
I don't want to unleash this controversy so late in the class, so I'll ask the question this way. Did the commentators discuss the idea that the tithe is twice now represented in a pre-Mosaic setting, and therefore the argument that the tithe is a Old Testament custom is maybe not valid?
That's very good. They didn't.
Okay,
They didn't get into AME and all
right.
those things.
Right.
At least my commentators did. Any other points? Any other thoughts? Something to think about, that tithe, and I like his attitude towards that tithe. This, you could say, would be a manifestation right off the bat of his faith, instruction in faith for Jacob, as he now, in response to the revelation of God, he goes, wow, okay, I need to give this back to you as a reminder to myself, if nothing else. By the way, that wasn't an advertising plug. So now we're going to have a full alms offering.